Girl Undercover, Episode 4. Written by Julia Derrick. The night after I was attacked, I dreamed of crazy scientists, evil government conspiracies, and ex-FBI agents with substance abuse problems. When my alarm clock woke me, belting so loudly I was swiftly pulled back to reality, I decided Ian Armory was full of it after all. Of course, I wasn't about to tell him that but play along with his delusions like planned. The guy knew way too much about me, unfortunately. If the way my stomach felt was anything to go by, and it usually was, it looked like I was going to be spending lots more time with him. I stretched my arms over my head and wiggled my toes to wake myself further, then sighed as I dreaded all those sessions I'd have to train this nut job. Sessions during which I'd have to keep humoring him constantly to make sure he didn't reveal my true identity because I pissed him off. Oh well, I tried cheering myself. At least I had another client. It wasn't so bad. An hour later, I exited the elevator at Nikki, about to get ready for my floor shift at the health club. I paused when I spotted a small gathering of people in the club cafeteria that I was about to pass, all of them gazing up at one of the two huge TVs that hung from the ceiling. It was an unusual sight this early in the morning when members were rushing to get a workout in before work. Barely anyone was in the cafeteria then, but now even some of the cafeteria workers had stopped what they were doing and had joined the cluster of members staring at the TV. As I got closer, I saw that they were watching a local newscast. The female anchor was talking about a woman who had been found raped and beaten to death right here on the Upper West Side the night before. According to the anchor, it was the third such murder in less than a month, and the authorities believed the same person was behind them. A Caucasian, dark-haired male of medium height in his late 20s, early 30s. When a photo of the victim was displayed on the TV screen, I knew why so many members and staff had gathered there, and why there were such somber expressions on their faces, so many sighs and headshakes. The victim was a long-time member at the club named Alicia Chang, who had been well-liked among members and staff alike. I had spoken to her myself a couple of days ago and had instantly felt drawn to her pleasant personality. I watched a few more minutes and learned, among other things, that Alicia had been attacked in her own home. She was already dead when the authorities found her, unlike the other victims, who had died shortly after being discovered and had managed to give the police an idea of the perpetrator. One victim had been found in Riverside Park, tied between a couple of trees and a fence. When the news cut to commercial, I left the cafeteria. I continued up to the 4th floor where the trainer's main locker room was and changed into my trainer's uniform. Two of the new trainers were standing in a corner talking and laughing, which suggested they were unaware of what had happened to the beloved veteran member. I wasn't about to fill them in, they would learn about it soon enough. As I placed my bag in my locker, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. I exhaled, already weary. Let's hope it isn't the person I think it is. I pulled out the phone from my pocket and checked the screen, dreading what I thought I was about to see. Of course it was from Ian. I was so not ready to deal with him yet. I hadn't even finished my coffee. There was no point in procrastinating reading it though, so I clicked open the text. Good morning, Jamie. Can we train tomorrow at 11 a.m.? Ian. Yeah, this guy was definitely eager to start training if he was texting me this early in the day. Thankfully, he had used my fake name while contacting me and not Gabi. An alcoholic and former drug addict like him was likely to make many mistakes that could put me in danger. An image of his face from when we had sat together at that bar last night popped up in my head. While not my type, he was unquestionably an attractive man with his even, well-drawn features and nicely cut jaw. It was amazing how fresh-faced he looked considering all those years of hard drugs and alcohol intake. According to the article in the Washington Post, his debauchery had started when he was in college. Since he must be pushing 35, you'd think signs of it would be visible on his face. But no, his skin was smooth and wrinkle-free, and there weren't even the beginnings of bags under his color-defying eyes. His blonde hair could use a trim, but it was surprisingly thick and glossy for a former junkie. Truly, instead of appearing worn, he was the picture of good health. He must have really good genes to look like that, I thought. Or maybe he had used some form of plastic surgery. When I met with him tomorrow for his evaluation session, and we went over his health history, I'd work in some questions to determine what his secret was. Maybe he'd show me a photo of his parents. If no plastic surgery was involved, one or both of them must look amazing still. Before I left the locker room, I texted him back. Sure, tomorrow at 11 is good. Please meet me by the fitness desk then. I instantly received a reply. Great, thanks. Looking forward to it. I frowned when I noted that he'd added a winking smiley face after his message. What the hell was that supposed to mean? Was he flirting with me? That had better not be the case. I prayed he was just a weird dude who liked to use smileys. Considering how crazy he was, it wouldn't be surprising. Whatever it meant, I was not about to respond with a perky likewise or something similar because I was so not looking forward to it. Instead, I put my phone back deep into my pocket and left the locker room. The day went by quickly. I trained a couple of members I met during my floor shift and got one to agree to continue training with me. That would be the 5th client I'd picked up in the 2 weeks I'd been at the club. Rolf, my fitness manager, called me into his office and told me he would drop one of my floor shifts the following week since I was doing so well. Rolf's behavior further spoke to the fact that the Adler Group was not some evil corporation that worried about me uncovering their secret unsavory experiments with humans. If they were, their managers would hardly be treating me this well, offering to drop a shift that fast. A new trainer usually kept all floor shifts for at least the first month of employment. The people at Adler were clearly happy with me and my performance. It was more likely that Felix Bose was tied to Cardoza somehow, even if the name Bose sounded a lot more German than Hispanic. I walked down to the cafeteria for a late lunch around 3 and spotted Ariel, one of the old trainers, as soon as I entered it. She sat down at one of the tables, facing me. When I had seen that this pretty 30-something woman was still working at the club, I hadn't been surprised. She was not only an efficient, great trainer with lots of clients, but she also looked the part with her curvy, super tight body and thick, honey blonde hair that flowed down her back. She and I used to not get along. I, like all the other trainers, had truly believed Ariel was a psychopath. She had been so determined to become the club's #1 trainer. But toward the end of my assignment, I'd gotten to know her and discovered that she was in fact quite nice, not psycho at all. She remained as unfriendly as ever, though, and hadn't welcomed me to the club like so many of the other trainers had done. Which was totally fine by me. As long as it didn't seem like she recognized me, I wasn't about to complain. Unfriendly or not, I wished I could ask Ariel if I could join her for lunch. Being part of the old crew and brutally honest, she could fill me in if there was anything fishy going on with the club's new owners. Emma wasn't enough. After our last conversation, I seriously doubted I could trust she was telling me the truth, but it would be too risky to approach Ariel. Ariel looked up as I was about to pass her and gave me a nice smile. Hi, you're one of the new girls, right? I had no choice but to stop at her table. Yes, I am. I started a couple of weeks ago. I'm Ariel. Welcome to Nikki. You'll love working here. What's your name? Jamie. Jamie Richards. Are you eating, Jamie? Yes, I was just about to go get a salad. Why don't you sit with me? I'm eating too. The way she was gazing up at me under heavily mascaraed eyelashes told me she wouldn't take no for an answer. So I said, sure. Do you want something from the cafe? She shook her head and grabbed her big, pink bag. No thanks, I'm good. I made vegetable lasagna yesterday and brought some to eat today. She pulled out a fork and a blue Tupperware container from her bag and put both on the table. Okay, I'll be right back, I said, and headed to the salad counter, thrown by her unusual friendliness. In my experience, people didn't change much. The reason for her behavior must be because she wanted something. I had no idea what that could be. Well, I guess I would soon know, I thought. I really had no choice but to eat with her now, or I would appear weird, not to mention rude. Being rude to Ariel would surely work against me. The line to order food was not nearly as long as usual, so I had my salad within minutes. I got some water from the water cooler and returned to her table. She smiled as I sat down again, grabbing her fork with a hand that had long, claw-like, blood-red nails. "I wanted to tell you that I love your workouts," she said, and pushed lasagna onto her fork. "I've watched you on the floor. You're impressive. We should work out together someday." Was us working out together the reason she wanted to have lunch with me? I had a hard time buying that. It was more likely that she had recognized me and was about to say something about it, especially considering how she was staring at me at the moment. Oh God, that is the last thing I need. Well, I'd just deny it. It wasn't like she could prove I was Annika. It would be okay, I told myself and smiled at Ariel. Thanks. Yeah, I like to go hard when I work out. That way I can eat a lot more. I'll say, you must be burning like 1,500 calories during your workouts. Yeah, let's hope so, or I'll get fat soon as much as I love to eat. Hey, whatever happened to Clayton who used to work here? I knew him when I was a member here 2 years ago. He was such a nice guy. I might as well try to pump her for some information while sitting there. Narrowing her eyes at me, Ariel nodded slowly. Oh, that's why I feel like I've seen you before. You used to be a member here. Yeah, for about 6 months before I returned to New Mexico for a while, I quickly confirmed, so relieved to be able to give a plausible reason for why she felt like she knew me. I should fuel that convenient belief of hers. I was supposed to do a session with you actually, but then I had to go back home, so I had to cancel. Ariel pushed out her pink-glossed lips that looked even pootier than I could remember, making me think they'd been surgically enhanced the way her huge, gravity-defying breasts must have been. Despite their size, they stood straight out, and the small workout top she wore did nothing to support this impressive feat. Yeah, I think I remember that you and I were supposed to train, she said, still nodding. Thankfully, we can now work out together instead, I said. So, Clayton quit then. She gazed at me with a serious face. I'm pretty sure he got fired. If you ask me, it's not strange as annoying as he was. What do you mean? I leaned closer to Ariel, so pleased she'd asked me to join her now. He was always questioning the new owners and how they wanted to run the club, claiming it wasn't going to work, and that it would end with all the members quitting. His attitude was so negative even his clients began to leave him. I honestly don't understand why he was complaining so much. There was a reason Millennium had to sell the company. They weren't making a profit. Adler might be stricter and expect more out of all the trainers, but they also offer more in return. For example, as soon as they took over, everyone got a 10% salary increase and access to great health insurance. When Millennium owned the club, only the top 3 trainers had insurance. That's a huge improvement. They also lowered the prices on training packages, making it easier for us trainers to pick up and keep clients. So far, what Ariel was saying made a lot of sense. The former owner's health insurance offerings had been terrible. I had also noted that the training packages were slightly more affordable these days, which did make it easier to acquire new clients. I wasn't sure about the salary. We were definitely paid more, but part of that could be explained through normal wage inflation. It was clear, though, that Ariel was happy with the change. As happy as Emma. Oh, I said. Well, I'm glad I got hired then. Everyone who works here does seem happy to be here, and management is great, especially Rolf. Ariel had a sip of her water. Yeah, I love him. He's great. And so is everyone else. As long as you do your job, this is a great company to work for. That's so reassuring to hear. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that a newscast was airing on the large TV hanging from the ceiling a few feet away from us. The anchor seemed to be talking about a dead man found somewhere. I turned my face toward the TV to get a better look and hear what the anchor was saying. A woman walking her dog found the man lying in the grass behind some trees next to the loop that runs around all of Central Park. Police arrived at the spot near the Belvedere Castle where the woman had nearly stumbled over the man. The man was pronounced dead upon arrival and had a gunshot wound to the head. He was Caucasian with short, black hair, of medium size, and in his late 20s, early 30s. His identity has not yet been released. He is believed to have been murdered. The NYPD is investigating the matter. The anchor moved on to a story about a demonstration in downtown Manhattan. Wow, Ariel gasped, still staring at the TV. What's going on? It's just one murder after another up here in our neighborhood. I thought this was supposed to be a safe area. She turned to me. Did you hear that one of our members was raped and beaten to death yesterday? She was the third woman found up here in just a few weeks. Yeah, I did see that on the news earlier today. It's horrible. I clicked my tongue. I'm surprised the authorities haven't announced there is a serial killer on the loose up here. That's what it sounds like to me since it's believed it's the same person assaulting these women. Ariel pulled out her phone from her bag and began typing on it. I watched her, wondering if maybe she was texting a client. She soon looked back up, her almond-shaped eyes round suddenly. I knew it. Belvedere Castle is right where I live. Like only a couple of blocks away. Really? Let's hope the guy they found was the person behind the rapes. Maybe someone was onto him and shot him. Yeah, one can only hope, Ariel said morosely, back to typing on her phone. I had no doubts the dead man who had just been reported was the same one who had assaulted me yesterday. Belvedere Castle was located exactly where Felix Bose had jumped me. Who knew, maybe Felix had planned on raping me before killing me. It hadn't seemed like it at the time, but it was still possible. I thought about what I'd learned about the rape victims. 2 had been found in their homes, tied to their beds, but 1 had been found tied up in Riverside Park. All had the same sperm in their bodies, suggesting the perp was either stupid or extremely confident he wouldn't be found. And all of them had been beaten to death. Bose had had a gun and a taser. I screwed up my face. Well, just because Bose had used a gun on me didn't mean he was also going to use that to murder me. It might only have been there to make me do what he'd wanted, get me to move behind the trees where no one could see us. Unless he had a silencer like Ian had, shooting me to death would be a lot noisier than beating me to death. With a cloth stuffed into my mouth, no one would hear me scream if someone happened to pass by, which was unlikely that late in the evening anyway. I honestly had no clue what Felix Bose had wanted to do with me. Ariel looked up from her phone. It's definitely time for me to get that dog I've been thinking of getting now. That's a good idea. What kind are you planning on getting? A German Shepherd. I nodded and was about to tell Ariel that it was an excellent choice. German Shepherds were very obedient and easy to train, which was why they were so popular with the police. But before I could put my foot in my mouth, I caught myself and just smiled. You should get it as soon as possible, I said instead. One can't be careful enough these days. The following day, Ian and I walked up to the 6th floor at Nikki to fill out his health history, assess his fitness levels, and do a full body movement screen so I could design his workouts. Instead of dreading this meeting, I had become eager to see what more I would learn about him. I also wanted to know if he had found any information about Felix Bose. Surely he must have looked. I had spent last evening searching for the dead man online and found nothing. It was as if he had never existed. I tried all kinds of word combinations in my searches, including Philippe Perdoza and the Adler Group, but nothing of use had popped up. Here we go, I said to Ian, and held the glass door for him, so he could enter the room where the trainers did the initial consultation with new clients. He looked hesitant for a moment, but then entered. "Please have a seat on that chair," I said, and indicated one of the 2 chairs in the small space, having fully entered my trainer persona. While he sat, I took a seat on the other chair that faced him. He leaned back, put his hands behind his head, and slung a foot over his knee, looking a little too comfortable for my taste. I gazed down at the health questionnaire attached to the clipboard on my lap, then back at Ian. He hadn't bothered to shave this morning, adding to his casualness. "When are you born?" I asked. He told me his birth date and added, "I'm an Aries." I raised an eyebrow. "Okay, good to know, I suppose. What are you?" He leaned forward and put a hand on my knee. "Wait, don't say anything. You're a Gemini, aren't you?" I looked down at the hand on my knee and frowned meaningfully. Who did he think he was? He instantly removed his hand and leaned back on his chair again. "I apologize," he said. "I have a tendency to get a bit touchy-feely sometimes, but I was right, wasn't I?" Actually, he was, and it pained me a little having to admit it. "Yes, I'm a Gemini." I gave him a smirk. "But I don't see what that has got to do with you. This meeting is supposed to be about you." "You're right. What's the next question?" I asked him questions regarding his heart and lungs, then moved on to questions regarding his eating and sleeping habits. Based on what he told me, he ate well and slept sufficiently. "And how about alcohol?" I asked. "How many drinks a week do you have? That can be beer, a glass of wine, or a shot of hard liquor." 2 to 5. "It really depends on what I'm doing that week." He looked me straight in the eye, as if defying me. I pretended not to notice. Obviously, he was lying. There was no way he drank that little, being an alcoholic. A functioning alcoholic, but still an alcoholic. Or maybe he was clean now, which still meant he was lying, as in that case he'd be drinking no alcohol at all. There was no in-between with alcoholics. Instead of jotting down his answer the way I had been doing, I paused, my pen lingering over the health history card. "Really? Are you sure about that?" He chuckled. "Why? Is that too much?" I narrowed my eyes at him. "Is that supposed to be a joke?" He wetted his lips with his tongue and said in a barely audible voice, "Maybe we should continue this conversation out there." He nodded his head to the glass door beside him. The area outside the small room where we sat was an empty passageway. It was only populated whenever people took the elevators up to the 6th floor, where the group exercise studios and the boxing area were. At the moment, the passageway was completely quiet. I reached for my phone that I had placed on the desk next to me as I'd sat on the chair. I smiled at him. "Have you heard the latest Usher song? It's so good." He instantly brightened. "No, but I'd love to hear it." I found the Usher song I had been referring to on my smartphone and pressed play. Soon Usher's smooth voice streamed out of my phone, filling the room with rhythmic beats loud enough to enable us to speak without being overheard. Even though I didn't think the room was bugged, I didn't mind playing along with Ian's paranoia if that was what it would take for him to keep talking. I was dying to hear what he had to say about all that had been written about him in reputable papers such as the Washington Post. He nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. There are eyes and ears everywhere in this building. Then again, I would expect no less from a cop of your caliber. I'm sure one of the first things you did after you got home the other night was looking me up online." "That's absolutely correct. Why didn't you tell me you were an alcoholic and a former druggie?" "Because it's not true." I crossed my arms over my chest and stared at him. "So you're telling me the reporter who wrote that story about you in the Washington Post made that up? Did he also make up that you were involved in a burglary and that you served 5 months of a 10-month sentence in federal prison?" "Precisely. Those are all lies made up to discredit any accusations I might make against the FBI and the Adler Group. This time it was I who burst out laughing. Wait, so you're actually telling me that if I was to call up the U.S. Penitentiary in Lee, they would tell me you were never there? How would the Washington Post ever get away with writing something like that? No, the Lee Penitentiary would tell you that I've done 5 months there. Just like that article stated. The prison officials are in on it as much as certain parts of the government. All media was served with the same news release. These lies have led me to become blacklisted in all government organizations, which effectively means I'm blacklisted everywhere. Really? So the government created all those lies about you. How convenient. It's not so convenient if you're me. I can't get employed anywhere because of my record. Fortunately, my father had some money I inherited a couple of years ago. Wow. Yeah, that is fortunate. I tapped my pen against the health history card on my clipboard. So where were you during those months when you were supposed to be in prison? I was on an undercover assignment in Europe. Ah, no one can confirm you weren't actually in prison because you were pretending to be someone else. Exactly. Which is why they can get away with doing this to me. Ha. Talk about elaborate lies. I wanted to roll my eyes, but I restrained myself. Is the president in on it too? I don't think so. He'll be done with his second term soon, which means he'll be out of power. The Adler Group doesn't need someone like that, they need up-and-coming power players. I'm convinced a fair amount of senators and congressmen and maybe governors are involved with them, and that at least some of them are members here since Nikkei is their headquarters. That was one of the reasons I wanted to train with you. I'm going to need you to find out who they are for me. I really didn't like the fact that he was essentially blackmailing me with his request. He smiled at me as if he'd asked for no more than for me to find out when the club closed on weekends. But I wasn't about to reveal how annoying and rude I thought he was behaving. Again, the good-looking nut job in front of me knew way too much about me, and I wanted him to keep that to himself. It was better to act like I'd love to help him, and then do nothing. Hopefully, by the time Ian was on to me, I'd figured out who had killed Nick and could return to LA. My approach should work. Nikkei had more than 9,000 active members, which meant it could take quite a while for me to go through all of them. Still, I might as well start by acting stupid, pretend I had no idea what he was talking about. So I tilted my head and frowned slightly. And how am I supposed to find out that? His smile grew wider. Oh, I'm sure you won't have any problem. I'm well aware that you, being an employee here, have access to members' information one way or another. I spoke to one of the other trainers on the gym floor, and he told me you guys can look up all kinds of information about members. You're not supposed to, of course, but you can. Unfortunately, what Ian was saying was true. All the trainers had easy access to crucial membership information. That's true, I said. Well, I suppose those politicians must be government officials in nearby states then, or it would be pointless for them to be members here. Not at all. They only need to come to New York a couple of times a year for meetings with the other executives of the company. He lit up, as though he just thought of something great. In fact, this will make your search even easier. What do you mean? I know Nikkei has the option for members to become executive members in addition to becoming a regular member like I am. Surely the politicians are all executive members. If you start looking among the executive members, you'll soon find out which politicians might be involved with the experiments. I smiled at him, struggling not to smirk. What he was saying made perfect sense. Most of the club's high-powered members were executive members, especially ones who didn't live in the neighborhood the way many of the club's regular members did. The laundry service and extra large lockers in the executive locker room were amenities out-of-towners needed. The usher song came to an end. I waited for the next one to begin before I spoke, using a cool voice. I'll take a look. Is there anything else I can do for you? I wouldn't mind some great training. Believe it or not, I'm not only interested in you doing some spying for me." He winked and gave me what I'm sure was his version of a congenial smile. To me, he couldn't appear any smarmier. I felt like throwing up. I cleared my throat and said, "Well, in that case, how about we continue with what we're supposed to be doing during this meeting?" Before he could answer me, I reached for my phone and pressed the stop button, cutting Usher's blaring song off short. We proceeded to discuss his fitness goals and any injuries he might have. Then it was time for me to weigh him and measure his body fat levels. I pointed to a piece of equipment that looked more like a baby robot than the high-tech scale that it was. "We will be using this machine to check your weight and body fat levels," I said. "You need to take off your shoes and socks for that." He nodded and removed his footwear, displaying a pair of feet that were in much better shape than his hair and scruffy face. The man obviously liked pedicures. I shouldn't be surprised I already knew he was a total freak. I wiped down the machine's metallic footplates and handles with antiseptic wipes, then motioned for him to get on it. As paranoid as he was, I expected him to protest, claiming the machine would record his vitals and then use it against him somehow. But he didn't, just calmly positioned his feet and handles where I indicated. I entered his height and age in order for the machine to be able to measure his body fat levels. We both remained quiet as the machine sent an electric current through his body via his palms and feet. A minute later, the machine printed out a sheet of paper with his result while he put his socks and shoes back on. I removed the sheet from the printer and looked at it. "Your body fat is 10%, I stated." He stood back up and frowned. "Really? That sounds a bit high for me." I pointed to the part that displayed his body fat percentage to show him that I wasn't making it up. "I don't believe that's correct," he maintained. "It must be something off with that machine." I smiled. That was a claim I often heard from men in particular when putting them on this machine because they refused to accept they were slightly fatter than what they had originally thought. I wasn't in the mood to argue with Ian, though, so I would just agree with him. "Well, it does measure your hydration levels," I said, "so I suppose you might be dehydrated. If you're dehydrated, the machine will read it like your body fat levels are higher than they really are. Is that possible?" I was sure it was very possible considering that Ian was an alcoholic. I didn't believe for a minute that the government had planted all that info about him like he was claiming, but naturally I wasn't about to mention that. "Maybe," he replied, "though I'm usually pretty good with drinking water, and I haven't had a drink since the beer I had at that bar the other night." He gave me a meaningful glance, which I pretended not to notice. "I'm happy to measure your body fat using calipers instead," I offered. "Sure, why not?" Okay, I walked over to a cupboard that contained the calipers I needed in order to measure his skin folds, another method to determine a person's body fat levels that was exceptionally accurate if a person was very lean. Not that Ian was that lean. I couldn't wait to show him the machine was correct. With the calipers in my hand, I told Ian to turn around so I could pinch the back of his upper arm to see his fat levels there. He immediately turned around and let me do what I needed, pulling up the sleeve of his light blue t-shirt. To my surprise, his arm was not only more muscular than I had thought, but also leaner. Well, that isn't unusual. Most men carried their excess fat in the stomach and around the waist. Why would Ian be any different? Surely he had sizable love handles. "Not a lot of fat there," I said as I motioned for him to turn around so I could get to his stomach and chest. He gave me a lopsided little grin. "I told you so." Mentally rolling my eyes, I told him to lift up his t-shirt so I could measure his abs and chest. Instead of pulling up his shirt, he grabbed the bottom and simply pulled it off completely. I had to bite my lip not to gasp out loud. The man had one of the most perfect upper bodies I had ever seen, and I was a trainer and had seen lots of them in my day, especially lately with all the gorgeous specimen that made up my coworkers. There was just a touch of hair on Ian's wide, muscular chest and another string of hair grew from the waistband of his low-hanging athletic shorts up to his navel. Shorts that hung very, very low on slim hips. I swallowed and forced myself not to stare at his exceptional body. There wasn't an ounce of extra fat on that ripped stomach. I didn't need to pinch his abs to determine that. "That give you enough skin to pinch?" he asked in a lightly mocking voice. It took all I had to act like I wasn't at all affected by how amazing he looked without his shirt. Yeah, I had known he was well built. That had been clear from his broad shoulders, long legs, and narrow hips already. But I had come to learn that men who were as tall as Ian often turned out to be a lot chunkier than they seemed in clothes. Not so with this one. Clearing my throat, I said yes and proceeded to pinch his abs and chest, determined not to show just how much his half-nakedness suddenly had me all hot and bothered. It wasn't like he wasn't aware of how good he looked, or he wouldn't have peeled off his shirt so readily. That smug bastard. Without a word, I sank to my knees and measured the skin on his mid-thigh, which was as lean and muscular and gorgeous as the rest of him. He peered down at me as I removed the calipers from his leg. "What's the verdict?" he asked. I got to my feet and put the slim calipers back into their black leather box, calculating the numbers I had gotten from the foreskin fold areas. 32. I gazed up at the body fat chart that hung on the cupboards to see where that number would fit in the predetermined charts. I sighed. According to the chart, Ian's body fat was 6%. I would have to either act like I had no idea what I was doing measuring people's body fat using the skinfold method, or admit that Ian had been right. The machine had been slightly off, making him appear fatter. I quickly decided that I was not about to incriminate my own skills and just let Ian be right. After all, anyone with normal eyesight could easily tell that this man was extremely lean. I smiled at him. "Your body fat is 6%. He grinned, pleased at me, and pulled the t-shirt back over his head. I could finally relax again and breathe normally. When his head reappeared, his blonde hair tousled like he had just rolled out of bed, he said, "What did I tell you? That machine is useless." I put my fists on my hips. "I don't know about that. As I told you, it determines a person's body fat levels based on how hydrated they are. You must be a lot less hydrated than you thought to score that high." I couldn't stop myself from letting a triumphant smile stretch my lips, and the words I should probably have kept to myself flew out of me. Of course, someone with your unhealthy lifestyle could easily lose track of how much water they've been drinking, so I can't blame you. But at least I now know that you must have had more to drink than that single beer. And as your trainer, this is important information for me to have. Ready to go work out. When I got home later that evening, I was exhausted and crashed onto the couch in my living room. Unlike the other nights when I had finished with shifts and clients, I didn't put myself through an intense workout before going home, and I was not about to run in the park despite the great weather. Not after what had happened the other night. I was too beat to even let myself get bothered by thoughts of how much I missed Nick tonight. All I was capable of doing was gaze at the TV screen in front of me, hoping that New York's 24-hour local news channel would have more to say about Felix Bose. It had been more than a day since his body had been found where Ian and I had left it. Ian had been no help finding out more about my attacker. During our training session, he told me he hadn't had time to investigate Bose yet. Of course, since he remained convinced the black-haired stranger was a hitman from the Adler Group and the government coalition, he was in no hurry. He definitely didn't think Bose had anything to do with the rape wave currently going through the Upper West Side when I suggested it. I didn't get an opportunity to really prod Ian regarding his hitman assertions, ask him what made him so incredibly sure of them, because too many other trainers and members had been around us at the time. You never knew who was listening in, and while I wasn't worried about spies from Adler, I still had to be careful for my own reasons. Ian had been in as good a shape as he was lean. never really getting out of breath or complaining that something was too hard as I put him through a demanding workout. I had discovered during his movement screen that he moved well, having no weak parts that needed extra attention, so I could have pushed him even more. It being his first session, however, I didn't want to challenge him excessively. Doing so could potentially injure him despite him being so agile and fit already. I pushed myself up onto my elbow when a male anchor with a beard appeared on the TV screen, announcing that a fourth rape ending in a deadly beating had taken place on the Upper West Side. The victim's brother had found the woman, a Belinda Jones, dead and tied to a bed in her own apartment at 2 p.m. today. Well, I guess Felix Bose wasn't the rapist after all. The frequency with which these rapes were happening was very troubling, as was the fact that apparently the NYPD still had no suspects. According to the anchor, the mayor had promised a $10,000 reward to anyone who came forth with information that led to an arrest. My phone rattled where it lay on the coffee table next to me. I extended my hand to see who had texted me. I sighed when I discovered it was the person I least wanted it to be. Ian? The text read, "Another rape was just reported on the news. Still think Bose is behind it?" Smartass, I thought. I obviously didn't think Bose was behind it any longer, but I didn't feel like admitting that to smug Ian. Well, I have to respond something. I stared at my phone. Unfortunately, nothing good came to me. As I kept searching my mind, it struck me how curious it was that Ian had texted me right after the newscast. It was almost like he could see me. It had arrived so conveniently. I chuckled to myself. No, that was silly thinking. How would he be able to do that? He was probably just lying on his own couch, watching the news on Channel 1 like I was, and then had decided to tell me about it. Finally, I thought of something half-decent to respond. Maybe he had a collaborator, I texted. As I waited for Ian to reply, I was sure he wouldn't be able to help himself. My eyes went to the TV again. A detergent commercial was playing. 10 seconds later, the phone buzzed in my hand, just like I had expected. I lowered my gaze to see what else Ian had texted me. I prepared myself for another snarky comment. I stared at the phone screen, and the words displayed there, certain I was misreading them. "You'll be next, and I'm going to enjoy every second I fuck you to death." I brought the phone closer to my eyes. I had definitely read the words correctly. Fury surged through me. Is this Ian's idea of a funny joke? But the fury disappeared when I noted that this text had not been sent from Ian's phone number. It had been sent from a number I didn't recognize, a number with a 212 area code. Before I could press the return call button to try to get the stranger on the line, my phone buzzed with another text, sending a chill up my spine now. Fortunately, this time it was Ian. "Let's go on an excursion," his text said. "Meet me at the victim's building, and we'll see what we can find out. The NYPD obviously need our help." My gaze was glued to the screen as I reread Ian's text over and over. He couldn't be serious. I couldn't show my face during a police investigation, despite that it was at the other end of the country. It was way too risky, and even Ian had to understand that. As I started texting this back to him, my phone rang. It was Ian. Oh God. I so didn't feel like talking to him. It was no point pretending I wasn't available to take the call, though, so I answered. I would just tell him I was so beat I couldn't move. Another reason I couldn't go. "Hi, Ian. I'm 10 blocks from the victim's apartment building," he said. "Meet me outside in 20. "No, I'm way too tired. Besides, did you forget that I'm undercover? I can't take such a risk." "Yes, you can. You don't look like you do back home, do you? And if you hide your hair under a baseball cap and wear a pair of fake glasses, no one will recognize you. I have a pair you can wear." I sucked in a breath to protest again when my phone shook in my hand. Another text. I removed it from my ear and checked the screen. "You're gonna beg me for mercy." The words were from the same number that had texted me that first threatening message. "Gabi." Ian's voice came out of the phone. "Are you still there? Is everything okay?" I put the phone back to my ear. "What's the victim's address? I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. "Really?" Ian sounded surprised, but soon recuperated. "Okay, great. It's at 60th and West End Ave. I'll bring the glasses." "Don't bother. I have my own." We disconnected, and then I called the phone number that had texted me. After 2 rings, an automated voice announced that the number was no longer in service. I should have figured it wouldn't be that easy. I called George back in LA. He should be able to figure out who the person behind those texts was, but of course George wasn't picking up, so I had to leave a message instead. I told him to call me back ASAP. It was important. Well, since Ian had been on the line with me as I'd received that second text, it was unlikely he was behind them. As out there as my new client was, I couldn't completely discount the fact that he might be the rapist and therefore the person texting me. Yeah, the 2 victims had claimed the perp was dark-haired, but for all I knew, Ian had worn a wig. I didn't want to believe that Ian had something to do with the rapes, but it was very odd the rapist had my number. How had he gotten it? It had to be the rapist texting me. Why else was I getting such disturbing texts? Very few people had my phone number. Just to be safe, I'd make sure not to end up with Ian behind me tonight if we were alone somewhere dark. I pushed myself up from my couch and threw on a pair of jeans and a nondescript sweater. After putting on a pair of comfortable sneakers, I bunched up my red hair at the nape of my neck and stuck a navy blue baseball cap on my head. Finally, I got my fake red glasses out from the medicine cabinet where I kept them and left to meet up with Ian.